Well, shalom, everyone. We're still waiting on people to show up, but we're let's see what we got going on here. A little bit of a delay, but we are live on YouTube right now, which is awesome. So just keep that in mind. If you want to go in and change your name or anything like that, you can. As far as I know, it's just going to, let me go ahead and highlight that actually. Go ahead and spotlight mine. And yeah, so the Zoom room says it's live on YouTube, and couldn't have been much easier. That's kind of crazy. Like I said, there's a little bit of a delay because it's bouncing off of one server onto another server, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, we're going with it here. Quite the delay, actually, but that's fine. Okay, so that being the case, I'm going to pay attention to the YouTube chat, see if anybody shows up. So far, we have 2 viewers, and so we'll go from there. See how do we jump into the no. There we go. I think that's okay. We got 2 viewers on YouTube. Don't know who they are. All right. So at any rate, let's go ahead and jump into this. Let's talk a minute about what we've got going on here. First of all, let me go ahead and get a sound check, make sure everybody can hear me and that I'm speaking, and that there's enough volume on the microphone. So let me go ahead and unmute and let me know that that's okay.
Crystal.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'll go ahead and mute you, buddy. Oh, you got it. Okay. So at any rate, yeah, I'm excited. I actually don't know what to do here. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. Okay. First of all, if you are a believer in Christ, or you are somebody who's exploring this area, it can be intimidating. There is a lot of intention on the part of the rabbis to keep things as simple as possible within the minimum standard. Let me tell you what that means. That means that you could very easily go and get an Orthodox rabbinical Haggadah. I'm going to explain that in a minute. A Seder plate, and you could keep Passover because they have examined Torah, they've examined oral law, and they have concluded that this is the best way to keep it. However, I don't know that that is necessarily the case, okay? What I mean by that is there is a potential here that there's a minimum behind the minimum. But when I address the idea of a minimum, I want you to understand that you guys, it's important for you to understand that that is not the hold on one second. I'm getting a text. I just need to address this real quick. All right, cool. All right. So, yeah. So one of the things that I think is important is to say, okay, what is the minimum here? What did Yeshua do? What is our obligation? Is there an obligation? What is this all about, right? Because there's the possibility in the realm of Christian circles to say, well, what benefit is this to me, right? What of what consequence is it? Is it a salvation issue? Why should I be doing it? What should I be thinking here? Right? Okay. So, guys, what I want to do is kind of create an environment of learning here. And what I mean by that is that I want to show you the path, and you're going to go down the path. Okay. So the first thing that we should talk about is the Orthodox Jewish way of keeping Passover, so that you can understand the extent of it, okay? And so I think one of the best ways to do that is probably to show you a Seder plate and explain the Seder plate. So I think probably what we're going to do is go ahead and pull that up on the board. So if you'll bear with me one moment, I'm gonna jump in here and pull this up really quick. But while I'm doing that, if anybody has any questions, you can unmute and you can ask me, or for you who's watching on YouTube, you can actually ask the question in the chat. Right now, it doesn't look like there's anybody really in here to chat. I don't know. I don't completely understand how to use this yet, so bear with me. There's the live chat. Okay, so Steven's watching. Okay. Let's do that first. Let's go ahead and pull up a channel there on the whiteboard. Let's just pull up a Seder plate and take a look at that. Because I think one of the more important things that we got to kind of look at is why things became the way they became. Okay, I think that's a key. So let's see, we're going to go Seder plate. And we'll just go look at an image of a Seder plate in images. Let's see if we can see the whole entire setting of it. So I think the best one, let's take a look at that one. Okay. All right, here we go, guys. Okay. So I'm just going to illustrate a little bit here as I'm talking and explain a little bit about the Seder plate real quick. So obviously this word here, Seder, hey, come on, pop up. There we go. There we go. Okay. So this word here, Seder, it means order. Okay. Order. And so I think, one of the things that we need to discuss is what that means. What is the purpose behind the order? Okay. So Seder, let's see, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and how do I get back to my background? Because there's a lighting issue. Actually, you know what? I think we're good here. Okay. So anyways, the Seder plate, this in general means to have order. And the whole idea behind the Passover, let me see if I can communicate this in such a way that makes sense. The entire Passover, oh, that lighting is not good, is all about the it's all about the traditional story. Okay. There's a statement in Exodus that says, when your children ask about this, you will tell them, our forefathers were strangers in a strange land, slaves, etc., right? You go through the story. Now, in Jewish circles, the father would tell this story to his children, and there's just kind of a participation where they're supposed to ask these specific questions. But the whole idea is that there's an order to it, okay? So the word Seder, coming from Sadar, which means to be in order. It's also where we get the name for the Jewish prayer book, which would be Siddur. It is important for you to kind of get your mind wrapped around that this would be a very mechanical thing, right? A very mechanical service. But so what do we got going on here? Let's go back to our browser for a minute. And I know that, let's go ahead and I'll just put that on the camera. Okay, so one of the big things that I want you to see here with this is going to be in the realm of that we have this shank bone, okay? Now, the shank bone, there's a few reasons why the shank bone is present. The shank bone is present because you are supposed to acknowledge the lamb, the Passover lamb, okay? Now, in that process, it's very, very important to understand that the reason why there's only a lamb shank bone here is because there's a belief in Jewish circles that you cannot eat the Passover lamb because there's no temple. Consequently, that would bring us to the egg, or what we call the betzor. The betzor is basically it's an idea that you would crack the egg and then dip it in salt water in order to demonstrate the tears for the destruction of the temple, and then the golden treasure inside, kind of indicating that there's still hope of another temple. Okay. Then the charoset mixture comes basically from the influence of the Greek Empire. This was actually a type of thing that was eaten in the vomitoriums, and it's kind of a combination of wine, apples, cinnamon. Some people use brown sugar, some people use maple syrup, etc., etc. But generally speaking, it's to represent the mortar, right? So this is representing the lamb from the Passover, the Pesach lamb or the Paschal lamb, right? And this is representing the loss and then hope concerning the temple. And then this is representing the mortar for making bricks, okay? And then this is something that is basically a representation of just a, this is just a representation of vegetables being present in the land of Egypt, and a weeping for the fact that that was something that was that was lost, right? So this is kind of representation of the leeks, right? Okay. Then what we have is we have the romaine lettuce, which is the bitter herbs. Okay. Okay. So this is, and we're just going to ignore this stuff. So this is basically the Passover Seder plate. Now, let me explain to you a little bit about that. Let me go ahead and address some things. There is a sentiment amongst Christian circles concerning the temple, the future temple in Israel, the third temple. There's a sentiment among Jews concerning the temple. For example, when you get married, if you watch a Jewish wedding, they will always crush the covenant wedding glass. The man and the woman both drink from a wine glass. They put it in a napkin and then they crush it. They stomp on it. And immediately the celebration begins. But what people don't realize is the prayer in the Siddur, in the prayer book says, our marriage will not be completely happy or complete, depending on the version or translation. But the whole idea is that their marriage is not all it could be because the temple doesn't stand. The same reason why rabbis will wear black and white and not colors is because this temple is not standing. And so they're in a constant state of mourning. Now, most Christians that I know want a third temple. And the reason they want a third temple is because there's a sentiment that will start the fulfilling of prophecy, because a lot of them just want to get out of here, right? Or waiting for the rapture or all these other things. But I propose to you that there was a revelation given early in Scripture that indicates that we are actually the temples. And I will propose to you that occurs back in a time when there was no temple. At any rate, the point being is that Paul seems to put emphasis on the idea that we're a temple. And also, there seems to be an idea that the third temple is probably not going to be a good idea. So I know that if somebody's Orthodox Jewish and they're listening in or watching, they may say, oh, this is horrible, right? Wait a minute. But I can tell you that Kabbalah itself teaches that you should not desire a temple until you have elevated your temple. In other words, Judaism itself teaches that you are a temple and that you have to do work within your temple before a Beit Mikdash could even be in existence. I'm sure there's a lot of Orthodox Jews who didn't know that. Now, I will tell you that when we're talking about this, one of the things I want you to think about is there a regression that occurs concerning the idea of there being a temple made with hands? It says in Scripture that God would not dwell in a temple made with hands. And I propose to you that the very evidence of the Qumran community demonstrates that there was a problem in the temple in Jerusalem during Christ's time or before. We have the caves of Qumran producing these documentations about these priests in Jerusalem versus these priests in the desert, and these priests in the desert are practicing purity laws and trying to completely abstain from whatever was going on in the temple, which is interesting because there's a commandment to go to Jerusalem for Passover. Or is there? Everybody believes that there needs to be this temple in Jerusalem for all these things to go on, when the truth is that there's an indication in Scripture that you are the place where God wants to dwell. And so when we're looking at this, Seder plate, One of the problems that we're going to encounter right off the bat are these two items, okay? These two items right here are a problem for a believer in Yeshua, and I'm going to tell you why. The first one is that if you are Torah observant, you're commanded to eat the lamb. And there's nothing to indicate that you can't eat that lamb if there's no temple, except within rabbinical, traditional, oral law or the Talmud. Number two, there's really no reason to mourn a temple if you yourself are a temple. There's no desire to regress from being the temple to actually having a building where God can dwell. Solomon himself said that. So in my congregation, I usually try to teach you guys to withdraw yourselves from these two items, okay? Now, in that process, then we need to also ask the question, why is there these things here, and are they necessarily a part of the process? Well, interestingly enough, that takes us into what we would call the essentials. So now that I've kind of dealt with the egg and the shank bone, so let me explain to you the concept that we're working with here, because I think one of the mistakes that people make is they try to go through this by going through the motions, but they don't understand the complete process. I propose to you, when it says that anybody who fails to acknowledge, consume, make mention of the lamb, the bitter herbs, and the unleavened bread will be cut off from their people, that's an essential. You probably want to do that with some intention. You don't want to just go through the motions. Now, is that an essential for salvation? That there needs to be an understanding that there's one of two ways in which this is going to actually work as a mechanism in the lives of people who choose to keep the Passover. Okay. This is not about heaven or hell. This is about a relationship with the Father and something very, very special that's going on, which I'll explain. Okay, so I think in this process, the next thing that we should necessarily look at is, what are these other things that are here, and why are they here, and what do they represent for us? Because there are some things in Passover that are very, very important that occur that are still more along the lines of Christian based. Now, I can tell you that some of my information that I've accumulated over the years is a Haggadah from Yeshua's time. Now, I can't find that book right now, or I'd have that on the overhead camera and we'll be switching to that camera. In fact, I don't know that I necessarily have that book anymore, and I wish I could find it. I can't remember the author, but it literally removes the destruction of the temple from the process and shows what Yeshua had in front of him as instruction. Now, let me explain something about that, because I'm sure there are Torah observants present who think that it's okay to shirk, to push away, to shun the rabbinical authority. Let me please ask that you look at Yeshua's behavior at Passover as proof that there were some oral traditions that he approved of. I'm about to show you and prove this, because one of the things I think all of you would agree on is there's no mention of wine, nor is there mention of dipping, nor is there mention of charoset in the Torah about Passover. Short version is that you are supposed to eat with your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. The lamb is supposed to be roasted with fire, and you are supposed to not put leaven into your kneading dough because you're leaving tonight. And yet we see Yeshua reclining. In addition to that, we see him drinking wine during this process. In addition to that, we see him dipping. Okay? Those are rabbinical traditions that are related to everything. And if you need a really good reference, I believe it was the Rabbi Gamliel, and of course we're talking about the Gamliel that Paul sat under, said the best way to acknowledge the lamb, the bitter herbs, and the unleavened bread is to make a sandwich and eat it. And of course, there's actually a discussion that shows that it's actually Rabbi Hillel, Gamliel's grandfather, who made this up, and so it's called the Hillel sandwich. But one of the things that's important about that is, and there's a tradition of dipping it into the sweet stuff to make it a little bit more palatable. And the reason for that is because there is not supposed to be weeping during a feast day. That is actually a rabbinical rule, not in scripture per se, that there is supposed to be joy and not weeping during a feast day. So one of the things that they've done is they've established that you are supposed to drink a certain amount of wine or alcohol, consume alcohol during a feast day in order to lighten the soul. In that process, there is the idea that when you do have the dipping of the bitter or the combination of the bitter herbs, the lamb, and the unleavened bread, that you would dip it in sweetness so that it, even though it produces tears, it creates a sweetness on your palate. Because we do not want weeping during a feast day. We had plenty of that in Babylon. Now, there's a couple reasons why this is so important. I think one of the first ones that you want to really kind of get your mind wrapped around is the idea that he drank the wine, he dipped, okay? Now, tradition would have it that eventually there would be more dipping, the dipping of the egg in the salt water, the dipping of the parsley in the salt water to have the sentiment of tears. But that's all related to the mourning of the temple. And I already showed you that I am not one who would regress from that. So in that sentiment, in the actual Seder plate, we'll go ahead and jump back over here. In our Seder plate, what we have is we have this this grouping of vegetables that are like okay, let's see here. So this group right here is basically the combination of bitter herbs. The dipping in the salt water is to represent mourning or tears. So I eliminate that because I'm not going to mourn for the Passover. And in a minute, I'm going to show you that there's a legitimate claim here for these two. But this whole idea of mourning the temple, I just really have a problem with. And so this one I eliminate, that one I eliminate. And the reason I do is because it doesn't reflect what my Messiah said about the Passover. It doesn't reflect what the Torah says about the Passover. It reflects what the rabbis' opinions are about the Passover. So in this process, let's talk a minute about the horseradish. Now, anybody who has consumed horseradish knows that it is a difficult item to palate. Okay. Almost everyone I know will get that tingle in their nose and the runny eyes. And so there's kind of this idea that you mix it with the lamb meat, you mix it with the lettuce or whatever, and therefore now you have the halal sandwich. However, I feel like this is sufficient to represent bitterness. But there is definitely a list of legitimate bitter herbs. When we're cooking, when I was in culinary arts class, I learned that you have different flavors that you mix into food to affect the palate in a certain way in order to elicit a certain kind of emotion concerning that food for that moment. And a good blend of those herbs and spices obviously creates a very good meal. My point is that there's a list of herbs that are legitimately bitter that are part of the flavor category of bitterness. Okay. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be horseradish. Now, the tradition is that the horseradish is one of the things that's dipped with the matzah in order to create a very bitter or a dry palate. Okay. And in that process, I think it's also important to take note of the fact that there is a form of this where we're getting into that kind of that Catholic suffering for your sin, weeping for your sin, penitence kind of a sentiment. And so I'm cautious with that. Now, having said that, horseradish is pretty good with lamb. Okay. But the idea or the intent behind the bitter herbs is an acknowledgement of the bitterness of slavery. And we're going to get into this. The reason why this is important, you guys, is because what I'm trying to show you is that you can very easily just go get a Seder plate, go get a Haggadah, and get your items that belong on the Seder plate and create a meal. You can go to Chabad.org and you can actually just do the Passover the way the Jews do the Passover, and you're going to be fine. What I'm doing is I'm refining this into my own heart and studies in such a way to show you what the Father has revealed for me about this season. So having said that, there's a couple things I think is important. This is not a time in which you are supposed to be mourning. He didn't stay in the grave, and nobody ever told you to weep for him. However, there is definitely an indication that we are supposed to rejoice in the resurrection. Okay? There's a hope and a promise concerning the resurrection. Now, having said that, I think it's also important that people operate off of their own conviction concerning this. And so I think it's also relevant to say that if you want to use horseradish as your bitter herb so that it produces a tear, just remember, you're going through emotion here, right? Your actual weeping for sin will only come when you actually have a strong conviction concerning it. And I have a feeling that Passover is not necessarily that time period. Okay. So I think it's important to understand that. Now, there's a couple things that I want to get into concerning the bitter herbs, and it's this. Romaine lettuce is a legitimate food for bitter herbs. Parsley is a legitimate food for bitter herbs, although parsley does kind of lean in the direction of of a sweet herb, it's still listed as a bitter herb. And so when we're dealing with this, you can very easily garnish your plate with parsley, and you could make a Caesar salad, right? I mean, we don't need to be confined to the Seder plate. The Seder plate is designed to help a Jew just do what they're supposed to do. There's a little bit more livelihood present in those who have the testimony of Yeshua and the commandments of God than those who just have the commandments of God, because there's a sentiment that carrying out those commandments is an obedience to him and therefore an acknowledgement of him being God. But there's no connection per se into the beauty of what happened at that Passover 2,000 years ago. So before I get off of the Seder plate, my question to you is, do you have, or let's do it this way. Does anybody have any questions so far about the Seder plate? Because I think that's an important area that you should address. We technically don't even use a Seder plate because we understand the processes. But if you get a Seder plate and use a Seder plate, there's nothing wrong with that. You want to throw an egg on there, just understand that it was designed around the idea of mourning for the temple. It's this idea that the temple is part of the completeness of a Jew, and part of the completeness of a connection to God, and that's just not so. And there are plenty of rabbinical authors who communicate that and say, don't think that you need to be in this state and not have joy with God. You can still have joy with God. You can still be encouraged. Look at Jeremiah. He says, look, y'all, you're in exile. I get it. But your life doesn't have to end there. Go ahead and marry. Go ahead and get occupations. Build houses. Have children. Enjoy your life where you're at, because you're not going anywhere for a while, so you may as well make the best of it, right? Okay, any questions? Go ahead and unmute or type in the chat on the YouTube channel. I'll give a little brief moment for you guys potentially to unmute and ask.
Is there a way to blow up the picture of the Seder plate at all?
To blow it up.
Yeah, because on the screen, for me, it's real small. I can't see what's what.
Okay, well, it should be filling up the screen, but I can definitely try to make that bigger. Let's see what happens if I do this. No, okay. I don't think
me.
Well, let's see. It looks like it's popping up on here. So let's go ahead and see, can I? Oh, no, that erased the whole picture. Hold on one second. Let me, I've never done this part with this beautiful whiteboard. So let's see if we can do that again. So we're going to pull up that. And then it looks like you screenshot it. Boom. Okay, and then we'll go select this whole thing. Oh, yep, there we go.
Okay, that's better.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think now I'll take a screenshot of it.
Okay.
And can you cross out the things that you're saying that
Yeah,
you were
sure,
crossing out before?
Sure. Yeah, so I usually, it's not, let me draw.
Oh, it's because it's the screenshot of.
So I usually don't use a shank bone. There's actually lamb there. I don't use the egg at all because the whole entire tradition behind it does not fit my, oh, there we go, does not fit my understanding of what has been communicated to us concerning the temple. Okay. I do use charoset because it is something sweet to the palate, and I definitely move in the direction of positiveness and not, I don't move in the direction of penance during Passover. I do use that because it's really good with lamb or whatever. Always have some sort of salad. And parsley is usually a garnish on there, but the whole point behind this is these are all bitter herbs. And that's kind of the point. Okay. Now there's all kinds of things like, there's a mention of vegetables because there's an acknowledgement that there was a loss of vegetables when they left Egypt. I've had some discussions with people about that I don't think that should be on the Seder plate in that way. Okay. Any other questions? Let me see. I've got one on YouTube here. No question about the plate, but I do have another type of question I'd like to ask because I have to get off soon. Okay, go ahead, Stephen. You go ahead and ask it. Go ahead and type it in. And while Stephen is typing his question, I'm going to go ahead and get out of that. Is that okay, Amy?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So I'll wait for Stephen's question to pop up here, and then but while we're doing that, oh wait, it popped up. Okay. So dessert is okay after meal Passover. Yes, absolutely. So that is one thing about this, is that usually what happens at Passover within a Jewish family is you'll have the Seder plate, you'll go through the Haggadah, and I'm going to talk about the Haggadah in a minute, but you'll go through the Haggadah, which is the spoken Seder. The plate is the eaten Seder, and everybody takes part in it symbolically, but there isn't actually a consumption beyond that of that plate. They'll have a separate thing a lot of times, and this is really interesting, a lot of times it's chicken, okay? Because they don't want to eat lamb during that time. And so it would be a roasted chicken. The most Orthodox people don't eat a whole lot of beef, like steak and things like that, because there's some beliefs concerning that I don't necessarily want to get into tonight, but they'll eat fish, they'll eat chicken. There is the possibility of having beef. It's usually just a minor portion of the meal. But they do have dessert type of things like chocolate covered matzahs or other things like that. They do. Just remember that dessert cannot have leaven in it, which eliminates cakes, eliminates wafers, eliminates many things that go into desserts. We don't really realize it. Guys, graham crackers have yeast in them. So don't think you can go make a cheesecake with regular graham crackers. I think it's important to understand that the reason why you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread pertains to a force of benefit of the commandments, instead of it being something where you have to go all week without yeast. There's a symbol behind this. So we're going to get into the symbols in a minute. So yes, Stephen, you can have dessert, but dessert cannot violate the rest of the instructions. And maybe I shouldn't say violate. They can't interfere with the rest of the instructions. Okay. All right. So in that process, I think also there is a necessity to discuss the Haggadah for a minute. And one of the reasons why I want to discuss the Haggadah is because there's kind of this understanding concerning the Haggadah that it has to be done this way, and that's the only way. You know, we don't know what all happened on the night of the Passover with Yeshua. And I will say that if you're a follower of Nehemiah Gordon and Michael Rood, there's the potential for us to get into the discussion as to whether this was even a Passover meal. My heart and conviction is that it was, and that there's a reason and a purpose behind this, and we'll get into some of that. But as far as the Haggadah goes, during Yeshua's time, there was a question asked, is how come on other nights do we have lamb and it's boiled, or it's grilled, or it's roasted, but on this night we have to have roasted lamb? The second question was, why upon this night do we dip intentionally, but on other nights we dip without intention? The third question that would have been asked during Yeshua's time, because the temple was still standing, is, why do we recline when we were commanded to leave with our sandals on, or stand up and eat with our sandals on our feet? And then the last question is, why do we have 4 glasses of wine instead of a single glass or 2 glasses of wine like on other nights? That Haggadah is from an ancient one they found in the, I believe it's the Cairo Genizia. In a Genizia, and I'm probably butchering that word, and I know that there's people who are real sticklers for accuracy and fact checking, so you feel free to have Q for lunch, but here's the deal. I am going to do the best I can to have this be relational with my God, or I'm not going to do it. And so when I talk about an accuracy or something like that, hold on one second. Let's look at what we got here. Oh yeah, ice cream. Yeah. Okay, in the top, and I'm about to hop off there. Have a good night. You too, Stephen. Have a good night. Okay, so but the process is the Haggadah is the telling of the story, and then the child asking the questions. And what's kind of difficult for me is that there is a place in Exodus that says, when your children ask, why do you do this tradition? Why do we have this custom? You're supposed to explain it. So my question is, do you want to just tell a kid the story of Moses, the splitting of the Red Sea, the plagues, and get it done? Or is there something deeper to be understood about the Passover? And what I mean by that is that this should be a situation in which the child now is given the reason why you do it. And so I'll tell the story about how I was seeking a deeper relationship with the Father as a Protestant Reformed Christian. And as I sought a deeper relationship with him, he began to communicate to me that I needed to keep the Sabbath, which led to investigation, and eventually led to more questions, and led to more scriptures, and led to more explanations. And I found myself completing instruction under a rabbi, and I found myself self-studying. I found myself in a position of Sabbath apologetics with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I found myself in a relationship with the Orthodox Jews, in which they actually had me lead a Seder meal because I had become so knowledgeable in the rabbinical understanding of things. It is really important to understand that the foundation of everything I do is Christ. But it is not the Protestant Reformed or the charismatic or the fundamentalist or the fringe Christian doctrine that puts me in that position. My Messiah is my Messiah personally and relationally. And so my Passover will be personal and relational to him. And because of that fact, I'm going to look at how he celebrated it. People sit there and say, oh, no, we can't trust rabbinical law. We can't trust the oral law, la, la, la. And we have Yeshua dipping, which means he had a karoset. We have him drinking wine, which was a tradition enacted by the rabbis. And there's more. So I think it's important that in this whole thing that you don't just throw the Seder plate out, don't just throw the Jewishness of this out. That's the problem that we had at Nicaea. This is not separate yourself from the Jews' day. This is look to your Messiah for instruction. Look to your Torah for instruction, because Revelation 12:17, Revelation, I think it's 18:11, and one other scripture I can think of where it flat out says the saints during the time of Revelation are going to be keeping the commandments. So yes, amen, you do have the testimony of Jesus Christ, the testimony of Yeshua HaMashiach, but you have the commandments of God, and accompanied with the commandments of God is the wisdom that these rabbis spend their entire lives studying Torah. Are they going to get it wrong from the foundation of Yeshua? Sure, fine. But you know what? There were plenty of people throughout Scripture before Yeshua showed up that gave us a pretty significant amount of wisdom based upon their lifestyle that was Torah observant. David being one of them. Now, I'm not here to be on a soapbox to try to get you to believe in or follow the commandments or anything like that. I'm looking more of saying, let's look at our Messiah and see what he did. He dipped. So what do we know? He definitely was what? Obeying the Hallel sandwich, as it were. The bitter herbs, the lamb, and the unleavened bread being dipped into karoset to sweeten the palate as you consumed the bitter herbs, which was probably a little bit more bitter than they are today. Now, in this process, then, the Haggadah that's traditionally used that you can get at any Judaica store online, and I'm sure they probably are on the whole rush delivery thing at this point, but you get my point. You can also I could probably pull up one right now on the internet. Okay, you could probably pull one up, print it out. Doesn't have to be messianic if you know what to look for. If it go through it the day before or 2 or 3 days before and start marking out stuff that does not necessarily jive with your relationship with Yeshua. This is not a hard thing to do. And this year, we're kind of a little bit kicking people out of the nest. Rabbi Q is not going to lead a Seder this year. You all are going to go and you're going to have your own Seder in your own home with your own family. And you're going to lead it and you're going to have your own participation in it. Now, I think it's important that as we discuss these things, we talk a little bit about alcohol. There are some people who struggle with alcohol as something that gives them an opportunity to forget about the pain of life, and they will be abusive of that substance. However, if you can have alcohol in your Seder, you should, and I'm going to tell you why. The whole point behind the wine is to enliven the soul. Grape juice does not enliven the soul. Okay? Now, let's talk a minute about the amount, however. The entire amount of the entire Seder meal is the equivalent of about 2 glasses of wine. It's around 4 ounces per glass. There's 4 cups that are drank. We'll talk about that in a minute because it pertains to communion. But what I really would like you to get your mind wrapped around is that if you can allow yourself with self-control to consume alcohol during Passover, it is part of what your Messiah did. And before you try to argue with me that he drank grape juice, I want you to understand the difference between the wine of our time and the wine of their time. Having said all that, I think it's important that we remember that this needs to be about self-control. In fact, I think Paul even says that some of you have gotten drunk. So obviously they were using real wine. Okay? So because of that fact, we need to understand that the whole sentiment of this feast is supposed to be about joy, excitement, rejoicing because of the deliverance from slavery, from oppression, from possession. And if you go and you watch my, if you're interested, nobody has to, but if you go and you watch my, the Cycle of His People video, it's a 5-part series. I think I have all the way through part 3 posted right now. I'll get part 4 and 5 posted probably tomorrow. But the whole idea here is that if you go and you watch that, you'll see that salvation is more about deliverance from slavery and oppression and possession than it is about some, some get out of jail free card. And I propose to you that that's a sentiment that is carried out in the Passover meal. Now, it's important also to know that this is part of the wedding ceremony of God concerning his people. There are 3 parts to a Hebrew wedding. The first part is called the Shidduchin. The second part is called the Eresin, and the last part is called the Nezusin. The Shidduchin is where a shadchan, a matchmaker, joins a bride with her husband in connection to be betrothed. It's the choosing of the bride, it's called. And during the Passover season, and you can see this evident also in the story of Ruth, that there's a presentation of women, I believe it's the story of Ruth, there's a presentation of women during Passover, single women dance in front of the single men, and that's a time where the shadchan gets to watch and see who's flirting with who, right? And so this is a choosing of the bride celebration. And because this is not the betrothal and this is not the marriage, this is the matchmaking. This is where he's saying, I want that girl there, right? This is the beginning of the wedding ceremony that's carried out in Revelation chapter 19. There are 3 mandatory feasts that the Father commanded. We have the Feast of Passover, we have the Feast of Pentecost, and we have the Feast of Tabernacles. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot in the Hebrew. What's important about that is to realize that the Feast of Tabernacles is the Nezusin, that is the consummation, the acknowledgement, and the completion of the marriage. The Feast of Pentecost is the betrothal phase in which the husband says, I will, I will, I will, I will. There's an acceptance, a drinking of the cup. And from that point forward, she's betrothed. But Passover is about that time of beautification so that you can show yourself to be somebody who would be desired by a husband. And so for you women who are participating in Passover, you can teach us men how to make us presentable to our potential suitor. In that process, obviously, there's an understanding that that kind of leans a little bit away from the Seder plate, leans a little bit away from the Agada, but a true Agada should contain that type of an acknowledgement, because we have been given revelation, not only in Jeremiah 31 through 33, that the new covenant was going to be a renewing of the marriage covenant that was made available to Israel, but that the bride herself is Israel. Okay. Now, I know that there's probably a possibility that somebody would be like, wait a minute, you talking about those guys over there in the Middle East? No, I'm not. I'm talking about the chosen people of God and what he felt about them and what he proposed to them and what they said, what he has said we will do and obey, which was an acceptance of that. Okay. So the deliverance of Israel from slavery into being a people, Jeremiah 31:30, or 30, 31:31, or 30, maybe it's 32, says that they broke that covenant, even though I led them by the hand out of Egypt and was a husband to them. There was a shidduchin, there was a matchmaking that occurred in which the people were given an opportunity to present themselves as a bride, and he was given an opportunity to present himself as a groom, and all of that turned into a betrothal at Sinai. And then immediately they broke it with the golden calf. So I think one of the more important parts of this thing is to understand that this plays a very cosmic and deeper role than just the idea of consuming some foods, which gets us into the idea of doing something in a ritualistic fashion in order to affect a spiritual attitude towards what we are trying to have as a relationship with the intensification of all power in the universe. Somebody who clearly does not have a tangible way in which to interact with us has given us a tangible way in which to interact with him. Every sacrifice is eaten, and the lamb is no exception. They put the blood on the doorposts, and then they went in and they consumed the same lamb that they slaughtered. Table fellowship with the Father, and here we have a commandment to eat with him. That's the whole process here. Now, before we go any further, there is actually a concern among Protestants that there is a commandment in Exodus chapter 12, I believe it is, that says you have to be circumcised in order to eat the Passover lamb. And there's a commandment that says that the foreigner among them has to be circumcised as well if they're going to eat the Passover lamb. I propose to you that Paul settled this argument when he said, what? He said, if you do the things of the law, you show yourself to be circumcised. So if a Gentile, though not having the law, does the things of the law, they show themselves to be circumcised. This is in Romans chapter 2. And a Jew, though or a circumcised person, though having the law, if they break the law, show their circumcision to be uncircumcision. And he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart. And so in Corinthians, he flat out says, let's eat the Passover together. And Corinthians 11 is about the Seder meal. We'll get to that. So in the process, I propose to you that this is not about a physical circumcision and does not have to contain that kind of sentiment. Now you say, well, you know what, Q, you're cherry picking here. You're choosing some of the stuff from the Orthodox. You're choosing some of the stuff from Christianity. You're choosing some of the stuff from Messianic Show me in scripture where I can't. Show me a verse that says that I cannot bring in all the information. Because the moment that you tell me I can, I'm going to ask you why you celebrate Christmas, or I'm going to ask you why you celebrate a American holiday. And what I mean by that is there's no verse that indicates to me that you can't draw upon different pieces of information to build on your relationship interaction with God. Now, there's a big difference between celebrating a festival that has nothing to do with God, is not commanded by God, and has pagan origins and pagan rituals built into it that were designed for the worship of demons and usually resulted in child sacrifice, exploitation of women, and cruelty to animals. I have a problem with that, but Passover is not one of them. You want to talk about cruelty to animals? Every single time you go to the store and eat a steak, you're cruelty to animals. So if I have a lamb, I slaughter it, I put the blood on the doorposts, and I eat that lamb, guess what? I have had barbecue with God. The point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, I've cut this thing all up. I've taken the things that I feel are definitely not legit, and I've taken the things that are legit, and I've gone with them, because it says the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, therefore do what they say, but don't do what they do, because they don't do. They say, but they don't do. In other words, don't be a hypocrite about this, but it doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if you want to use a Seder plate, you want to use a Haggadah, that's fine. I'm showing you how the Father has refined it with me. So let's talk about some of the other things that are going on in the Seder. The Afikomen is oftentimes very quickly and easily acknowledged as something messianic, but the truth is you can find it in the Passover Haggadah for the ultra-Orthodox. They hide the matzah. Their kid goes, finds it, and buys it back or purchases it for a price with candy or money. People want to put that and make that Yeshua, and I understand that you do, and if you want to, you can, but that's not where that tradition came from, and that's not why that's there. You cannot assign something to something that's not legitimately there. So when we talk about the Afikomen, I myself don't do it. I don't see a purpose in it. I don't feel like it is a part of my Passover. It's not readily present in Yeshua's Passover. It's not present in Hezekiah's Passover, from what I can see, and it's not present in the commandments in Passover. So I drop it. I eliminate it from the list. I don't do the hiding of the matzah and going to find it. Now, if somebody wanted to, let's say that I'm at somebody's house and they want to do the Afikomen, am I going to be a jerk about it? No. You need to make this your own. You need to decide. If you want an egg, have an egg. You want to mourn the temple, go right ahead. I'm not trying to stop you. And I'm not telling you that you're wrong for doing that. I'm just saying, do we really want to regress here? Do we want to go from a physical temple to a spiritual temple and then back again? Or are we supposed to be ascending? And even Kabbalah teaches this. And so I think one of the more important things here is that you make this personal with your God. You have a choosing of the bride. You have a death, burial, and resurrection of a Messiah. You have all this beautiful imagery in Exodus 12 to parabolically create a scenario of deliverance from slavery. Even if the Exodus didn't happen, which there's plenty of evidence that it did, it's a great parable about your own sin and slavery to it, and the possession of demons, the oppression of demons, the infestation of demons. The idea of being in a foreign nation or being under the control of a foreign entity and being delivered from that is miraculous, beautiful, to be rejoiced. So before I get into the communion part, does anybody want to ask any questions about the Haggadah? Any questions? Okay. So the next thing that I want to get into is I want to get into the communion. Okay. There's a couple of things that are important. The first one is that if you are participating in a monthly communion, like every first Sunday of the month at your church, I'm not trying to condemn that, but you were not told to do that. And you were not commanded in scripture to do that, neither by your Messiah, nor by Paul, nor by anybody else. That was a Catholic enactment. That was a catechism addition to Christian tradition. And because Luther had his fair share of what he felt was appropriate or inappropriate about the Catholic Church, and what he felt was legitimately scriptural, they kept that tradition. But I'm going to tell you right now, you are only supposed to actually legitimately, intentionally consume the bread and wine at Passover. Okay? This whole idea that you're some sort of charismatic and you have the little wafer with the little cup and you peel the thing off and eat it and drink the thing and you had your personal communion with him. No, sorry, it don't work that way. It does not work that way. You don't get to have you don't get to set your dates and you don't get to put your times. He set the times, he set the dates. And I have a strong conviction about this because of the cup of redemption. And I'm going to explain this in a minute. So in the Passover meal of Yeshua's time, there were 4 cups, about 4 ounces apiece, which equates to about 2 glasses of wine. You need to keep in mind that because the wine was so strong back then, that a lot of times they would water it down. So we're not dealing with, proofs here. We're dealing with palatable wine. All right. But it still created a enlivening of your spirit, as it were. So the first cup is called the cup of salvation. And if you want to understand the word salvation in its best definition, again, you don't have to, but if you wanted to, you could go watch my video, this cycle of his people, where I do a study of the word salvation. In that process, the cup of salvation was an acknowledgement of there being a removal of the people by force out of Egypt. Okay. The second cup is the cup of deliverance and pertains more to the idea of the overall general moving away from oppression, as opposed to the snatching away or the pulling out of slavery. There's an overall movement away from oppression. That's the cup of deliverance. And it's usually drank after the first dipping. Then there is a time where there's a breaking of the matzah, and that's the time when the afikomen is taken and hidden, right? But there is no but in Yeshua's time, he breaks it and he distributes it among the brothers, amongst the apostles, the disciples. And when he distributes it, then now he brings this third cup up. This third cup is called the cup of redemption. And the idea behind redemption is that you are in possession. You are possessed. You are actually somebody's property, and you are purchased back and then given your freedom. Okay, this occurs in Hosea. This is evident in the Passover itself. When the father turns around, when Abba turns around and he says, you need to pay half a shekel for each firstborn. He's saying, because I bought you from Pharaoh. I bought you from Egypt. And so the cup of redemption is the cup where Yeshua says, this is the new covenant sealed in my blood. Drink you all of it. Now, what's interesting about that is then there seems to be an indication that maybe there wasn't an intention to consume all the cups and therefore consume all the wine. But in this one, he says, drink all of it. Now, Paul goes on to expand and say, you guys wonder why you're sick. You wonder why people are dying. You wonder why people are not, doing well. It's because you're not taking this cup seriously. This is the cup of the purchase of your soul. And so I want to take a moment to stress to you that you may go do your communion on Sundays, and I don't think there's even a never mind in the Father's process with you with that. But when you take the cup at Passover, take it with a clear conscience. If you need to confess, obviously you can schedule a time with me or with your pastor or with somebody else. Get it out of your system. But you walk into that moment fully prepared to accept the terms of the covenant that you'll be betrothed to. In other words, the whole idea is to show yourself available as the bride to him. Show yourself that you're ready to be the bride. Show yourself to be that beautiful, spotless bride. How do you clear your conscience? It's real simple. You go down the list of the people that you've offended. You go down the list of the sins that you've committed, and you intend in your heart to pay restitution if there's restitution required by Torah, like if you stole something, or if there needs to be a confession and request for forgiveness made, etc., etc. This is that moment when you don't want to be with those things on your mind. Now, in that process, I think it's also important to know that there's mercy, but Paul's clear. People died. People got sick. So clear your conscience before you drink the cup and drink it worthy of drinking it. Because it's the cup of showing yourself to be available for betrothal. You're not a harlot. You're not guilty of the immorality of going after other gods, serving other gods, practicing the worship of God the way the nations worship their gods. Deuteronomy 12. I think one of the more important things that you have to kind of take into consideration when we're dealing with this is to make sure that you understand the seriousness of it, but then understand the mercy of God. He's not a wrathful, insatiable God. This is more about your heart and your mind as you approach the throne, right? So you partake of the cup of redemption, and you eat the bread of his body as an acknowledgement of his death and burial. But there's one more cup after that, and that is called the cup of Elijah or the cup of praise. And Yeshua says, I will not drink that cup until I drink it with you in my kingdom. And I think what that kind of equated to was that when I raise from the dead, then I will drink that cup with you. Not saying that he did that with them. I'm saying that that's the idea here, is that there needed to be the death and burial, but it couldn't stop there. That's why the third cup instead of the fourth cup is the cup that is so serious. So now after you've drank that cup, then you drink this fourth cup, and this fourth cup is the dessert, the final thing. As soon as you drink that cup and set it down, you say next year in Jerusalem, because the whole point behind it is that you are going to next year have the temple be built and you're going to go there instead. I propose to you that what the scripture actually says is that you would that it was where he would put his name, that you would go to the place where he put his name. Now, I do believe that I can show evidence that that is potentially your local synagogue, but I also want you to understand that's here. Where he puts his name is here. You are the temple. And so you can go and be, camping often in some canyon somewhere alone and keep Passover. Okay. Okay. So after that last cup is drank, it is finished. Okay. That doesn't mean that you have to end the celebration. If you want to have, a DJ over, or you want to, play a game together, you want to watch a movie together, that's all you. The minimum that you are supposed to do is eat bitter herbs, unleavened bread, and the lamb. The minimum that Yeshua brings to the table is the unleavened bread and the wine in communion. That's it. You can literally have leg of lamb, some Caesar salad, wine, and unleavened bread, and be done with it. Or you can get a Seder plate, you can get a Haggadah. What's the point behind the Haggadah in this sense, right? The point behind the Haggadah in this sense is that you're actually going to do this in such a way as to give testimony of your deliverance from slavery. Right? This is a great time for you to tell your children the story of how God delivered you from darkness. Say how the people of Israel did it, because you are Israel if you're grafted in. Our forefathers, yeah, if you're adopted, he's your forefather, right? Our forefathers were in the land of Egypt under the house of slavery, blah, blah, blah. Brought them out, Red Sea, boom, whole bit. But this is also a time to really understand and acknowledge the deliverance from the slavery. Time to remember what you were before. Listen, you're supposed to let the dead be dead. And what I mean by that is in Jewish tradition, in an ancient Hebrew tradition, in the tradition of Yeshua's time, there was a time of mourning, and when that was finished, they're done, gone, bye. Not 2 years later, oh, it's their birthday and I'm hurting. No, done, bye. Let that go. They're dead. That's that. Great memories. We'll rejoice in them, but we're not going to try to raise them up from their rest by desiring that they be here again. So when your old man is dead, you don't bring him up. You don't say, oh, yeah, you know what? There was this time when I did this with this girl, or there was this time when I went on this motorcycle ride with this guy, and oh my goodness, that's why you were born, right? That's not the point here. The point here is more along the lines to say, I was lost and I have been found. I was dead and I have been raised. I was blind and now I see, right? I have been awakened to the relationship with the intensification of all power in the universe. That's the power behind the Haggadah. That's why Yahweh said to his people, when your children ask the question, why is this night different? Let's talk about timing here. Generally speaking, if you want to follow the rabbinical calendar and go ahead and just have Passover when the rest of the Jews have Passover, that's fine. If you want to go to rootawakening.com and take a look at the calendar, you can, in fact, let me go ahead and pull that up so that we can take a look at this really quick. My personal revelation with the Father is that he told me that the feast days are in the eye of the beholder. And as a result of that, the way that I want you to think about this is that if there's a sighting of the new moon, you yourself have sighted the new moon. Let me go ahead and just get to this link here, wherever it's at. They're supposed to be much more loaded here. I don't know where it went. I'm not quite sure why that is that way. Let me go ahead and switch this over here so you can look at it. But I don't see the actual link for the calendar here. And I'm not quite sure why that is. Let me go ahead and pull it up on my tablet instead, because I know it's there. Oh. Okay. Count 4. All right. So here you can see on the evening. So just to give you a demonstration, this right here is the moon and sun. And so if you look at this line in between March 23rd and March 22nd, you see that line kind of falls in the first fifth of the day. That's sundown. So April 5th at sundown is the actual legitimate moon-sighted day for Passover. Between sundown of April 5th and sundown of April 6th, you can eat the Passover. Let me explain to you kind of what I'm getting at with that. If you wanted to prepare the Passover on the 5th and eat it at twilight, which is when there's 3 stars in the sky, in other words, eat it as a later dinner, you could. But it has to be eaten between April 5th and the sundown of April 6th. So the sundown of April 5th to the sundown of April 6th, anywhere in that period of time, you can eat the Passover. You could have it for lunch. You could have it as a late lunch. You could have it for breakfast. Never heard of that. Maybe have some eggs with it. I don't know. But then, you can actually have it as the dinner that evening. It's entirely up to you. It just says it has to be eaten between the 2 twilights on the 14th of the first month. Okay. And so that's one piece of information that you are welcome to, text me about and ask me about, but that's generally the calendar that I follow, because the Father showed me that if I don't have a calendar and I was actually out in the wilderness, let's say that we're dealing with a SHTF situation, I still will know when the new moon is because I can watch the sky. Now, there might be a little bit of inaccuracy as a result of clouds or whatever, but the point is that my heart and my relationship and my Passover are directly related to my ability to watch the sign. It's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to watch the sky. We're supposed to pay attention to the signs in the heavens. And so I think it's very important to understand that you can go and you can use the rabbinical calendar. And I'm pretty sure right now they correspond to each other. I don't think that they're off. I think they both will show April 6th as the day of the Passover. Let's talk a minute about why we have this thing about sundown to sundown, because a lot of people don't understand that. And they think it comes from Genesis where it says there was evening and morning, but that's a very appropriate interpretation of Boker and Erev. The truth is the reason for the sundown to sundown is because a day is reckoned in that way as a result of the commandment of Yom Kippur, that you would humble yourself at sundown on the 10th day, and you would humble yourself at sundown on the 9th day, and you would go until the end of the 10th day humbling yourself, which we have interpreted as fasting. Okay. Now, the reason this is important is because then Yom Kippur becomes the counter for Jubilees. In other words, it's at Yom Kippur that Jubilee is reckoned. So from the first year to the 50th year, Jubilee is reckoned from Yom Kippur. Okay. The Shemitah, or the 7-year cycle, is counted 7 times, and then in that year after that 7th 7 is the Jubilees. And so we look at the Shemitah, or the 7-year cycle of the crops, that 7th year being the year that you let the ground go fallow, is reckoned from the first of the 7th month. And so therefore now we have the process of why Yom Kippur or why we have the evening to evening reckoning of time, is because everything pertains to Jubilees. Okay, that's like the big deal in all of God's commandments, is this time of releasing everything back, redemption. Right? The releasing of prisoners, the releasing of debts, the releasing of land covenants, everything that pertains to that is governed off of Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is from evening to evening according to Leviticus 23, and that's why everything is reckoned off of evening to evening. Because the first month has to correspond to the 7th month, because the first day of the 7th month has to correspond to the 10th day of the 7th month. The time reckoning has to be there. You say, well, why is it so important? You know what? Don't ask me. But God has this timing thing that he deals with. And that's why you cannot legitimately acknowledge the 25th of December when you are not commanded to. You are commanded to have your feast days on certain dates at certain times. And if you look in the book of Revelation, everything corresponds to dates and times and months and years, etc. Okay. So, any questions about the timing or about the wedding feast of or not the wedding feast, but the choosing of the bride? Any questions like that, you can put them in the chat if you're on YouTube, or you can put them or you can unmute and ask the question.
So my question regarding the timing is, Rob and I were thinking we would do our own because of the logistics of the kids and work schedules. They can't get off. And then do a teaching for them later. So, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, like, does that go against, God's ways or not? Or,
So
you know what I mean?
I guess, so here's the thing. Okay. Obviously this feast day is a relationship between your family and the Father. Okay. and the Messiah coming in as this factor by which you can have a clear conscience, by which you can be the pure, spotless bride, by which you can be made virgin again, by which you can be pure, etc., etc. There is definitely, number one, this first thing, and that is that there is a commandment that if you are unclean or you are on a journey and you cannot participate in that day, that you are supposed to keep the Passover 30 days from now. In fact, it was one of Constantine's arguments. Why do they keep Passover twice? So during Constantine's time, they were actually having 2 full-blown Seder meals, and this ministry has itself done that. So it's possible, Amy, that you could do that. Now I'm going to throw one more in there, but I want you to be very careful to let your conscience be clear, because I know that there's a lot of times where you guys end up feeling condemned about something, and I want you to have your conscience be clear. But in Hezekiah, the people eat the Passover. I mean, during Hezekiah's reign, this would be in Chronicles, I believe. The people eat the Passover and they're unclean. And the priests come to Hezekiah and say, the people are violating God's law. They're eating the Passover unclean. They're not supposed to do this. And Hezekiah says, may the good Lord pardon. In other words, Hezekiah defaults to mercy of God, that at least they're trying. Now, like I said, you need to let your conscience be clear. If you feel like it would be better to do the second Passover so that you are actually having it with your children, with the meal and everything, that's great. I do not fault that, and I think that that is legit. But if you were to say, for example, on the 6th, eat your own Passover, and then later on do a Seder meal with the kids to teach them, may the good Lord pardon. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think there's a legitimate thing in your heart that you want to acknowledge and have the Passover together with your God on the date he appointed. Amen. But to have another one with your children later on and then feel like maybe that might be wrong with God, just let your conscience be clear. If you feel like it's wrong, then try to schedule that second Passover, which I believe falls around like May. It's like May 2nd, I think, was supposed to be the 30 days in case the barley wasn't Aviv. Any other questions? Does that satisfy is that a satisfactory answer, Amy?
Sorry. Yes, I was trying to look on the calendar to see what day that would be.
Okay.
So,
So yeah, I think that there is a legitimate there's a legitimate argument to be made that this needs to be your conscience clear, but there's no condemnation here. This isn't supposed to be something that's difficult or hard. Like I said, you want to go get the Seder plate and a Passover Haggadah and do it that way, that's fine. I'm showing you some deeper, more enriching things concerning the relationship with your God, the relationship with the Messiah, etc. Okay? So I was going to ask, does anybody have anything to add from their own experiences? Anything where they're like, hey, I did Passover this year or last year, and this is something I think that I would like to see different, or something that I see is maybe something that would enrich this experience more, etc., etc. Anybody like to add anything? Any other questions? So I'm going to do my diligence this week to try to find a link, or even maybe Amazon books or whatever, to get that Yeshua's Passover book. It was such an amazing book, and I wish that I never let go of it. I'm almost positive maybe I just left it somewhere. But the point is that that's what's going on. I think that's the best Haggadah that you can use. But you can create your own Haggadah. Wouldn't it be amazing to create your entire Seder off of your own traditions with your family? You know the confines now. Bitter herbs, lamb, lettuce, wine. That's it. Oh, and unleavened bread, sorry. Bitter herbs are the lettuce. So lamb, lettuce, wine, unleavened bread. Done. Right? This does not have to be a big old thing. If you don't have a whole lot of money, you don't have to put a whole lot into this. You don't have to go buy some $100 Seder plate. You can actually get a paper plate, download one of those pictures, print it off, cut it out, glue it to the plate. Okay? Maybe have the kids color it or something. I don't know. But you get my point. You can make this your own. And that's what I want to see from you guys this year. I know that you like when I lead and teach and give you wisdom. I know last year I did the innkeeper and everybody loved that, where I was the guy who was the owner of the place where Yeshua ate the Passover. And I got into character and people asked me questions as if I was that character. It was really fun. But this year, we're going to draw near to God. We're going to get into a place where this is special between you and him, between the one whom you could potentially have be your suitor, right? You're going to open yourself up and allow your beauty to shine, because it's time to make yourself available for somebody to choose you as a bride. You're going to teach your children how to have this tradition and value it, enjoy it, etc. You're going to consume a beverage that you may not normally consume that's going to enliven your spirit a little bit, and you're going to have a good time. You know, maybe put some tunes on, whatever. Doesn't have to be mellow either. You can get the roof, you can raise the roof. The key to everything is that this is a time of celebration with him. Let me tell you what it is not. It is not Easter. And I know that there may be Christians watching on YouTube, because I can't tell who's there. But I want to just assert to you the idea that at the Council of Nicaea, they cut the Passover out of the Christian experience. I'm going to encourage you to this year, instead of Easter, celebrate Passover and see what happens. It's not a sin if you don't go to sunrise service. A couple arguments I would like to just place really quick. First one is the sign of Jonah. 3 days and 3 nights, Yeshua would be in the grave. My question to you is, if you start on Friday afternoon when he's killed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you go to Saturday afternoon, and you go to Sunday afternoon, you don't get Sunday morning. But I'm going to throw one more caveat in here. Let's say that we just go ahead and we count Friday as a whole day. There's some sort of prophetic reckoning that is popular in Christian circles, that a whole day counts because of one area of time. So Friday's one day, Saturday's one day, Sunday's one day, and therefore he could raise from the dead on Sunday morning. But the problem is you go Friday day, Friday night, Saturday day, Saturday night, Sunday morning rising. Where's the third night? And so I will propose to you when it says that Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, there had to be a third night, which eliminates Good Friday, Lent, all that other stuff from your relationship with God. And I propose to you, if that's wrong, then potentially we could reckon that Sunday morning is a problem as well. Here's my point. There's a lot of problems with Easter. There's a lot of evidence of Passover. Paul talks about it in Corinthians. Acts talks about it twice, I believe. Yeshua participated in it, potentially more than once, etc., etc. Okay? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that on the one side, I am emphasizing Passover, and I am emphasizing to let go of your paradigm that it's not okay to keep it or participate in it. And then I also would like you to let go of the pagan festival of Easter that has been superimposed over Passover, superimposed over our Messiah, and superimposed over your Christian faith by anti-Semitic people. The Council of Nicaea did not have a heart for the Jews. And if you're a Christian today and you support Israel, then you cannot support that doctrine. Any questions concerning that? Any questions about Easter? Any questions about the origins of Easter? All right. Well, I think we covered everything. So this is what oh, somebody unmuted. Go ahead.
I just wanted to maybe have you share that the scripture, wherever it is, I can't remember, in Acts maybe, where they have used the word Easter, isn't actually Easter when you look it up.
Oh, yeah, sure. I can do that really quick. Let's see. What camera do I need here? I need camera 4. Give me 1 second to get that pulled up, and then I'll swap over to camera 4. I believe that is in Acts 19. But I'm not quite sure if that's it. Tell you what, we'll just go and do a search on. Go ahead and switch the camera over. You guys can watch me do this process. So I'm just going to do a search on Easter. And I'm going to switch over to the King James because that's where we're going to find that. Okay, Acts chapter 12, verse 4 looks like. Let's take a look. So it says, when he had arrested him and he put him in prison, turning him over to the 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending only after the Passover to bring him before the people. That, of course, in the King James Version is Easter. Okay. I believe the New King James potentially has another reference to Easter. Let's just see if that's the case. I wonder if NLT does it. No. I know Young's Living Translation doesn't use it. So yeah, it looks like it's just the King James. And that may be the only verse, that may be the only scripture that contains that. At any rate, Yes. So when we go into the Greek, obviously we've already seen it's not Easter, but let's just look at that word in the Greek. And of course, that is actually the word Pascha. Let's see how we do here.
Strong's G 3957. Pascha. Pascha.
Okay. So that's Pascha. And it's the Paschal sacrifice, right? Or Pesach. Pesach is the Passover in Hebrew, Pesach. So is that satisfactory, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, you guys? I feel like this went really well. I kind of feel like I may have talked more than I should have, given you guys opportunity to ask questions, but it seems like maybe there hasn't been actually a whole lot of questions, which is good. Which is good. I mean, that means that there's.
I have one.
Go ahead, Cindy.
So, wine. There's so many different types of wine. Is there a certain wine that is recommended?
Oh, like for lamb, I think you could probably potentially Google that and try to find out. I know that there's a wine out there that I think would be really appropriate for this, and it's basically a wine that's mixed with soda, and so it still is alcoholic, but it's a lot easier to palate and a little bit more watered down because it's mixed with soda. Because obviously I'm not looking for people to get drunk here. It's just an enjoyable beverage with the meal. And if you have issues with alcohol, I'm not telling you to drink. And if you also, let me just say this, if you have issues with alcohol or any other vice, set up an appointment with me. And if you don't have access, I don't think I put my calendar in Linktree yet, but once I get it into Linktree, I'll put it up for people to be able to access it. But if you feel like you have a vice, I am a certified recovery coach. And so I can help you with that. But if you don't have issues with alcohol, you may as well have a good time. May as well. Okay? Yeshua did. Any other questions?
So it
Yes.
doesn't have to be red wine. It could be white wine.
Oh yeah, no, there's I am not entirely convinced that there was actually, I don't know what species of grape there was in Israel. Like, I don't know if they had it. Maybe Amy would know this better. I don't know if they had a white grape or a yellow grape. I can tell you what sounds just horrible is like a Marlowe or something. That just like just totally strips your palate. Maybe a Cabernet, but I'm not quite sure on that. I feel like a lighter wine goes with lamb, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. It would be, I tell you what, I will go ahead and do the research and post it on our network. And for anybody who is on YouTube, if you'll just put in the comments that you're curious about the wine, I'll remember to post it there. Okay. Any other questions?
Personally, I'm for drinking a wine that you actually like, because otherwise it's
You
pretty
know, I gotta
horrendous.
tell you, you're not wrong, Amy. This whole idea that you have to have this kind of wine with this kind of, no. If I'm going to drink a wine, I want it to be enjoyable. So kind of partial to white wines myself and pink wines. But go ahead. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, well, I think there is definitely an opportunity for those of you who are on YouTube to leave comments in after the live chat goes away. I think you were able to leave comments. I'm not for sure on that. If anybody has any questions and they have my number, you can text me. If you need to set up a session with me before Passover to discuss this more, most of you have my Calendly. I'll get that onto a link tree, and we're going to try to get some semblance of After His Heart Ministries.life up and running, which will just be a simple website. It'll just contain our PayPal so that we can accept donations, and a link tree so that you can schedule an appointment with me, and maybe a couple highlights from a couple of my videos. At any rate, point being is that we'll try to get that web presence so that people can get in contact with me and make this happen. Any other questions before I shut down this meeting? Any more? All right, well, I am going to go ahead and close this down, and I'm going to wish everyone shalom. May you be complete in nothing. I'm sorry, may you be complete and in need of nothing. And that's the simple version. May your chaos come into order. That's the not so simple version of shalom.